Hi, I'm Melissa Bill, and welcome to the Business Roundup, where we catch up with the movers and shakers in the business world. Today, joining me is Dallas Counts. He's an investor and the Chief Operations Officer at VendorMint. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm excited to be here.
Now, I know with the future of just, the retail industry, supply chain, all of that has been big topics, especially when you're talking about tariffs, different types of things. It's definitely, top on the list in the news. Can you start off a little bit before we kind of dive in, giving a little bit about your background and the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent 15 years at Walmart. Most of that time at Walmart, I spent in the merchandising division, running different categories, mostly in food, beverage, frozen goods, all the yummy treats. Um, and towards the end of my career at Walmart, I led the entertainment, toys, and seasonal site operations and site merchandising team for about 2.5 years. So got really deep into e-commerce at a very interesting point in time during COVID and coming out of COVID. So we had some rapid growth, which was really exciting. And then I moved from Walmart over to a company called Flywheel Digital, where I led retail acceleration and partnerships. And then I had the pleasure of meeting my current business partner, Max Boren, and became an investor and the chief operations officer in VendorMint. And so you might be asking, what is VendorMint? VendorMint, we are a revenue recovery and retail compliance organization. So as a merchant, in my time at Walmart, one of the things that I often was challenged by suppliers were the different types of deductions that we, the retailer, would take on invoicing or on different fines, and how could they mitigate those so that they could reinvest their price back into more productive areas like retail media or data, or maybe even just into price to be able to do those wonderful rollbacks that Walmart's so well known for. And so as I left Walmart and as I was at Flywheel, this became something that Max had done in his past and I was still pretty passionate about. And we decided to start up the company VendorMint. And I got to become an investor and decided to be the COO of the company. And so um, that's a little bit about how we got our start.
And that's amazing. So sure you probably saw some things that felt could be addressed differently. Is that one of the things that kind of led you to want to get involved in VendorMint?
Absolutely. As a merchant, it wasn't something that I had direct control to be able to help each of my individual suppliers with. When I became a merchant, we were it was very much about EDLC, EDLP, everyday low cost for everyday low price. And many, many years ago, in my early days, it was pretty easy because all we needed was the lowest cost from the supplier. But over time, new things started creeping into the supplier where they needed to invest in retail media, they needed to invest in data. Markdowns became a bigger topic. And then, as you alluded to earlier, now you have tariffs and other macroeconomic pressures. And so it's much more difficult era for suppliers nowadays where they're having to control many more levers in order to be competitive and have a great strategy with their retail partner.
And now, in what ways does VendorMint help suppliers kind of create more revenue and enhance compliance?
Yeah, great question. So at the core of what we do, we work with suppliers across 50 plus different retailers where we help audit their invoicing and purchase order process. And so we start at the very beginning and we go through all the whole flow to understand, but when they get their purchase order to when they do an advanced ship notification to when they do their invoice to when goods are received, what has happened along that process. And so oftentimes, and it's pretty common, you can either have errors in receiving through your logistics, or you potentially have errors in how you build your pallets. So, as an example, you might have gotten an order for 100 units of a widget, and instead of sending 100 units, you may have accidentally only sent 90. And when the retailer receives that, they're going to mark that as a shortage of 10. Well, sometimes that shortage of 10 is not real. Maybe that pallet that you sent, widget A on also had widget B, and they may have miscounted the two and put the inventory in the wrong spot. And now you've potentially created a shortage on one of those items and an overage on the other. And the way most retailers work is they will reduce your dollars for what they're shorted, but they won't pay you for what's over. And so there's a process, a reconciliation process that you need to go through in order to get that money back. And that's the base of a lot of what we do, but it gets much more complicated than that too. There's a lot of other things that we work on, like contractual terms. So when you're shipping, do you have an allowance? And some people give a cash allowance if they get paid within a certain number of days. We'll help audit and make sure that those are staying correct. There's also what they call swell allowances, which is for damaged product. And we help audit that to make sure that those are staying within the right bounds. And then also, there's sometimes within your damages, there can be issues where maybe a store uh, inadvertently takes damages that they're not supposed to on good products. And that can end up through a whole that can spin up a whole a chain of events on its own. And so we help audit each one of these, whether it's a overage or shortage, whether it's a damage, a returned product, whether it's a contractual obligation. But nowadays, the other thing that you have is retailers also have had a lot of complexities come in the last 15 years, where obviously e-commerce and ship to home and how do you get products to consumers faster is becoming a big deal, and they've had to invest in that. And so with Walmart, Target, obviously Amazon, and these others, you have these really quick deliveries where they're delivering from stores. There's a whole process around auditing that we can help with. But during that time period, because these retailers have had so much pressure to serve the consumer where they want to be met, they've added expense. Well, that has emphasized inefficiencies in the process. So now what a lot of these retailers are doing is saying, hey, suppliers, if you're inefficient in shipping to us, it's causing inefficiencies for us. And so now we're potentially seeing retailers fine suppliers for bad practices. And so this can be just the type of pallet that you're shipping on. It can be the type of corrugate you're using. How is your label set up? Has it been wrapped well? Did the pallet come in the way it's supposed to, or during transportation, maybe it got damaged? I said a whole lot there, but there's a whole suite of things that we help with audit along your purchase order all the way through your payment to make sure that it's being accounted for properly. And then we also work upstream to make sure that your shipping practices are within the different retailers' compliance standards so that you can avoid those fines.
Right, because like, these things add up, so a little here and there, but over time, you're talking about quite a bit of, revenue that's being lost, I'm sure.
Yeah, we actually see anywhere 3 to 5% of net ships in deductions. Now, that doesn't mean, or chargebacks, that doesn't mean that all of those are invalid. Many of those are valid. So if you're paying a cash discount, that would be rolled in there. But then there are some that are invalid where maybe a receiving practice was wrong, maybe a return or a damaged good was treated improperly, and therefore the supplier was on the hook for paying for that, but they maybe not should have. And so within that 3 to 5%, depending on the shipping lane and how they're doing their fulfillment in the type of category they're in, you can see the recover amount be all the way up to close to 50% of invalid of that 3 to 5% being invalid. And so it can be a significant amount of margin that you could be using in more productive ways. And so all of what we're doing there is kind of the first step. The second step that we do is we actually work with our clients to make systemic changes to try to avoid deductions or chargebacks in the first place, whether they're valid or invalid.
So kind of address that issue at the root of the cause.
Yep, absolutely.
And now you've built a pretty select team of professionals who, I guess, altogether, it's 60 years worth of experience in the retail industry. Can you discuss, like, e-commerce, supply chain? How are you using all of these different areas to really kind of help these suppliers?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you hitting on that. We have been very fortunate to assemble what I like to refer to as the entrepreneurial Avengers. We have quite an incredible team that are bringing a incredible skill set. So, Max Boren, my partner and the founder of VendorMint, he was originally in the early days an Amazon seller and was operating a jewelry category that was on very thin margins, and so every dollar really mattered to him. And he actually built one of the very first Amazon FBA deduction companies that would do the research and help you file to get money back with Amazon. And you'll probably start drawing some parallels here of how we came to be on VendorMint. And then he went on to actually create a company called Gatita because of that process that he had built at his jewelry seller, and actually got out of the jewelry business and pursued that full time, and ended up building that to a pretty big business. It was called Gatita, and they had around 15,000 active sellers on their platform when he exited the company. I think during their tenure, they had served over 25,000 sellers as well. So Max is very familiar with the space, built very complex systems because there's a lot of document management and automation that needs to be done in order to make this efficient because it's a very tedious process. One of the reasons why suppliers don't build these teams in house is it's very complex, and it's very difficult to be able to manage, especially across multiple retailers. So Max is definitely one of our, lead Avengers, entrepreneurial Avengers that helped form the company. But we were very fortunate also to get a gentleman by the name of Brad Martin. And Brad actually stood up product development for deduction recovery at another startup that recently sold for a good amount. And so he's already done a little bit of this, and he's very excited to take it to the next level. And then we have Rob Gonda. Rob Gonda is absolutely incredible. He was the chief digital officer at McDonald's. I think he's sold 3 or 4 companies. He was the executive vice president at Catalina, which Catalina, if you're not familiar with, manages a lot of data and works with almost every retailer, I think, outside of Walmart in the US for when you go into a CVS or Walgreens and they print the coupons on your receipts. Well, that went through Rob's team, and they would look to understand who were you, what did you buy, what were you needing from a loyalty perspective, and they would help decide what coupons you would get on your receipts. So Rob has joined us as our CTO and is leading just an incredible developer team. And then we've been very fortunate to be able to hire a few individuals that have immense pasts. Between the two of them, they have over 50 years of experience in deduction at retailers, managing on the retail side the shortages, the overages, the returns, and contractual. So um, that's kind of the core team that we were able to form. And then we have a bunch of incredible supporting individuals as well that really, but those are the core that we've started with, and it's just been a great ride, and we've been able to build an incredible product and help a lot of suppliers.
And now, what are some of the ways you work to recover revenue by recuperating invalid deductions? We kind of went into some of that and like enhancing like compliance, optimizing the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. So with each different type of deduction, there's different criteria from the different retailers on what you need in order to dispute that deduction. And so we take a lot of pride in making sure that before we dispute a deduction, we've met all the criteria that the retailer has asked for. Also, we want to make sure we operate within all retailer policies and guidelines because we would never want to make sure that we put our clients at relationship at risk with any retailer, and they change often. So one of the things that we do is we're constantly looking to understand those different new policy rollouts that they have. But I think it really just depends on the retailer and the supplier. Well, it's a very curated approach to say with this retailer and this deduction type, we know that we might need a bill of lading, a proof of delivery. Maybe we need an email from the merchant at that retailer as supporting evidence. And so we work to collect all that, and we do it as in an automated fashion as we can. With our clients, we have the ability for them to mass upload or give us an API connection. And then we also have API connections into different carriers so that we can try to take on the burden of finding documents. Documents is probably one of the most tedious aspects of doing deduction recovery. So if you're going after a shortage, one of the things you need to show is that on your bill of lading or proof of delivery, it had the real number of units and that it was signed as if the real number of units were there. And so it shows that that's how it was received, and you're able then to be able to go dispute that claim. And then differently with returns, you have your return agreements, and you have even photo evidence from the return warehouse of what was received and when. And so we're able to leverage that. So I think that's the big piece of that is we take all that on so that the suppliers don't have to. And we try to make it as light a touch for them as possible. There's a little bit of effort we'll need from them just to get the initial setup going, but once we get it going, it should be pretty hands off.
And now, from you, I mean, from your perspective, what were some of the I guess, lessons learned from building and running the day-to-day operations of like a new established company?
I'm sorry, I think I missed the first part of that. Would you mind repeating?
For you personally, what are some of the lessons learned from like, building and establishing this new company?
Well, great question. Um, I spent a lot of time in corporate, obviously, within leadership at Walmart and then within Flywheel Digital. I think one of the things that I've learned here in the entrepreneur world, and I don't know that I would say was learned, but got to experience more so than even just learn, is the number of different roles that we all get to play and the empowerment that we need to make sure that every one of our team members has. I think we talked about empowerment at a corporate level and how important it was so that each of your individuals, your associates, would be able to be productive. But in a in an entrepreneur, smaller company, it's not just a thing that's going to make them successful. It's imperative for the company, meaning we won't be able to survive if everybody that we bring on isn't working their hardest and their best, and able to wear multiple hats when needed. And we've been very fortunate to hire individuals that are taking that empowerment and running with it. And we're, as a leadership team, giving it out as much as we can to the broader group. But other than that, it's a really fun journey. I spent a lot of time in corporate, but if you look at my life growing up, my mom owned two businesses, my dad owned a business, my grandparents owned multiple businesses. Actually, outside of my dad working at a corporation for a little while, almost all of my experience being raised was my family owning businesses. And so this has been something I feel like I've been wanting to do for a really long time. And now that I've gotten to hop into it, I can't imagine going back to the corporate world because it's just such a fun adventure.
And it's an area too, I think we were talking a little bit like supply chain. Do you think what are some of the areas you feel it's going to change and maybe grow in the future?
Supply chains in an interesting spot right now. I think you had mentioned tariffs earlier. I think if I take supply chain and I expand it a little bit just to include manufacturing, because I think that's kind of where the conversation starts with with where tariffs are. And I would say the uncertainty of tariffs more even than just tariffs being a thing. What I hear a lot in the local, so I live here obviously in Bentonville, Arkansas, home of Walmart. So I still talk with a lot of either local suppliers or other friends that may still work at a retailer. I think the biggest challenge that they're kind of seeing in the moment is that because tariffs change so frequently, meaning maybe it's been a 55%, it was 125%, then it was 30%. The classifications of items keep changing a little bit. There's a lot of uncertainty in that manufacturing. And so why that's important is it's really difficult for the suppliers to make strategic decisions about how they're sourcing goods because the tariffs keep changing, both the percentage and the classification of what's included. So, originally we had this broad tariff on China, but then toys was excluded, or certain toys was excluded, certain electronics like Apple iPhones and things were excluded. So as those classifications keep changing, it makes it really difficult for these suppliers upstream to make strategic sourcing decisions. Uh, and so with that, I think what you're going to see is as that normalizes and suppliers do get to make decisions about sourcing, if they do elect to move a factory, it's going to have a little bit of a ripple effect on what's your transportation method? Where are you coming from? Your freight lanes may look very different, whether it's coming from China versus Cambodia, or a different Asia-based country, or even maybe not Asia-based. Maybe it moves into South America, et cetera, depending on the category that you're in. And so you have a lot to think about, and it's a really tough decision because a lot of these factories have had relationships with these suppliers for decades, if not multiple decades, and they have to protect their business. So as soon as you make a strategic decision to move from one manufacturer to another because of a tariff, you give up that line time, and getting it back is going to be almost impossible. And you have to secure it, and you have to be really comfortable in that decision. So, from a transportation and I start with manufacturing because I think what you've even seen is some individuals say maybe I will move my manufacturing back to the U.S. because it'll streamline or simplify um, my production over a long period of time, and I may be able to benefit from that. I do think that you'll probably continue to see tariffs in the future continue to be a bigger conversation because it feels like it's one of those things that we've talked about and it's probably now here to stay as the political environment continues to change. So the transportation will be really interesting to see how that morphs as well. I've got a friend that owns a company where they actually work on tariffs and they work on tariff classification and they work on helping companies understand, are they set up on first or second cost, and can they get a factory that's not on first cost set up on first cost. And so there's a lot that goes in it. I know that was a long ramble there, but it's a really interesting uh, market to watch over the next 6, 12, 18, probably 24 months as we see all this start to play out.
Right. And see things changing. Well, I definitely, now if people want more information on your company, what's the best way to find it?
Yeah, absolutely. They can always email me, dallas@vendormint.com, or we have a website. They can go to vendormint.com. You can also go to our LinkedIn. We have a way for you to engage with us there. VendorMint on LinkedIn as well. If you search that, you can find us. And so, any of those avenues, if they would like to reach out and learn more, we would love to get and connect and see how we might be able to assist.
Sounds great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
I really appreciate you having us, Melissa. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining the Business Roundup, where we always try to bring you interviews with some of the leading people in business, whether it be technology, finance, or energy. I hope you tune in. I hope you subscribe and listen, and we'll give you updates for new interviews that are coming up. Until next time, I'm Melissa Bill.